I'd like to first say thank you to Duncan and Ian for allowing me the opportunity to moderate this panel. When they first allowed me to do this, I was rather excited. I mean, transportation is a huge topic, and to try and then condense it into 20 minutes of discussion is very tricky. So thank you very much. And I guess in terms of all of us in the fire industry within this region specifically, there are a huge number of projects that have been built, operated, also in the design phase and in the construction phase around transportation as well. So it's a fantastic arena for us to be working in, and it's a good chance for us to talk about it today as well. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of mix up our panel discussion today somewhat. I am a consultant fire engineer, and on the panel here we have representation from authority with engineer Pramod. We also have design. We also have consultancy as well, and obviously Terry needs no introduction from an operations background as well. So it's really good for us to have the kind of mix of everybody in terms of the fire safety industry as well. So, as a running theme throughout His Highness's keynote speech this morning, and also throughout many of the discussions that we've had today, technology and innovation has been a kind of underlying theme throughout everything. And I guess that's my first question today, and the structure of my questions kind of outline the structure of how we work as consultants as well, fire consultants specifically. We first work obviously in the design stage. We obviously work with the designers. We need to understand the design intent. We need to, as fire consultants, obviously make sure that that is in line with the local codes and international codes. They then go through for authority submission and approval. And obviously, if anything does go wrong, then obviously the operations can kick in, and we can ensure that everything's designed accordingly and make sure that all of our firefighters are safe as well. So that's the structure of my questions today. So James, you're up first. My first question. Obviously, with all of the advancements in technology and a lot of and kind of announcements in the media about the region specifically as well, what kind of advancements in terms of technologies are you seeing in regards to building design and also master plan design?
Oh, thank you, Tom. In terms of our design, if I look back, say, over the last 20 years, obviously all of our software and our design models are much more sophisticated than they were before. Now we're able to design everything in quite a lot of detail quite early on in great deal of 3D, and adding in all of the material properties and things like this. And so this helps, for example, I know when we need to do simulations, CFD analysis and things like this. Other aspects that we're trying to do in terms of new technology is always, if we can, introduce some sort of artificial intelligence learning. I think we're still at the early stages of that, at least in the design consulting viewpoint. But also including, say, inputs that we have from drones and things like this to build models of the buildings that we're doing. So it's probably in that sort of viewpoint that we're going towards, I would say. But in terms of fire, I would say it's we're looking at things like new materials as well. So we're trying to make our buildings much more lightweight, and then maybe reverting back to maybe some of the more traditional materials. I can see that coming as well, maybe the use of more wood products and things like this, when we look more to sustainability and things like this in our design. So we consider quite a lot of things, and then we also consider, of course, how it might burn down or catch fire.
Indeed.
And how we put it out with all our fire systems. So.
Indeed, and I think obviously with new technologies in terms of new ideas and new designs, it's when they're kind of realized as well and implemented into projects. And I guess that kind of ties into my second question to Engineer Pramod. In terms of these new technologies and perhaps drones, etc., are you seeing this kind of realized in terms of projects that come across your desk in terms of approvals?
Not as such. It's more of a designers and operational side of it, and eventually we'll see that coming, and especially for operations side. And during the day we saw that AI is going to take a big leap actually, and we will see that influencing all fields actually. I don't know how the approval process and those things, but yeah, definitely the material test data, and for designers, I'm sure the new technology is going to be playing a big role, actually.
And I guess my question to a consultant, in terms of the new technologies, obviously working in 3-dimension was a key leap from the 2-dimension. In terms of Revit, and in terms of application to fire safety and approval process, what are your thoughts in terms of that and in terms of the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. My background's more the risk management side rather than the engineering design. But the key changes in or advancements in technology with smart signage, for example, is key for these infrastructures that mass evacuation of these premises in an emergency. So factoring that in into the design at the early stages is key, really.
Yeah. And obviously in terms of an operational firefighting, these new technologies, as we heard before, in terms of lithium-ion, they've obviously got associated risks with that, Terry. And I know that you touched base on that at the end of your discussion on lithium-ion. But, I guess in terms of those risks associated with it, would you like to elaborate any further? Or?
Yeah, I mean, operational aspects are kind of last in the food chain, if I can say it that way. It takes us a while operationally to gear up to the type of tactics that we deploy when we're met with certain risks, and to try and keep up with the changing technology of firefighting products, like for example the water additives that we've got now. It takes a while to filter through into operational capability. Tactics and procedures, they can be updated quite quickly, but then they're only as good as the product that you're using. And we find nowadays you need a little bit more than just brute force and ignorance and a high pressure hose reel. You need some form of additive, and obviously this platform allows us to maybe stay ahead of the game a little bit. And I think if I say that there's a weak point, is that we don't share platforms as often as we should do operationally with the leaders in the industry, the innovators. We might be then a little bit, I think, better equipped from an operational perspective. I think,
absolutely. I think that's really, it's really important as a designer to understand those concerns, and obviously working together to make sure that how we design things is safe, not only for the building occupants, but also for the intervention teams as well. I'd like to move to the next question, which is in relation to the region that we're in at the moment. And obviously, as a designer, I'd just like to kind of ask a question in regards to the design and any kind of things that we need to, that you would perhaps consider when designing within this region specifically.
Well, from a normal design point of view, in this region, we've got the obvious temperature, dust, and particularly high humidity here at some parts of the year. And so this is quite a key design element for us, for the region, making sure that's all. So that's from a design point of view, and then how we'll control the building with all of our various systems as a result of that. And then probably the other aspect that we always have to think about, and I think there's to be much more now, is the future ongoing operations and maintenance of those buildings. And then particularly on the maintenance applications, how we will be sourcing parts and replacing things like this. So it's really thinking about how the building will be maintained and operated, and really sort of working back from that level and feeding that into the design, so you've got this loop going. So we spend quite a lot of time doing that. And probably one of the good things that these days with the much better design models we have in 3D is that we're able to explain to the approving authority and the operational team, they have a much better idea because we've got much better models and we can demonstrate and show what's going on much better. So for communicating our ideas, it's actually really useful.
Yeah, and I think if you put it in the context of transportation, obviously all of the transportation hubs are usually complex structures. You know, they may have airside, landside divides, etc. There may be a complex rail station, etc. So these complex building on complex structures, you know, that kind of three-dimension view and review is kind of key as well. Engineer Pramod, in terms of the kind of hierarchy of codes and in terms of kind of international codes and local codes, specifically for transportation, we obviously have NFPA 130 and we have NFPA 502, which kind of set some requirements, but in terms of kind of operational requirements, they are relatively light. We obviously have UA fire code that kind of picks up all of the other requirements pertaining to that as well. I just wonder, in terms of working in this industry as well, and working as a fire consultant in this industry within this region, one of the great things is that, you know, we're kind of at the coalface, so to speak, with yourselves and with everybody that is kind of instrumental in the update of the code, which is great. And I just wonder, you know, as we go through and we work on projects, and you may have certain elements that you may be looking to perhaps update in terms of the code. You know, are there any kind of updates that you may be able to share with the audience today in terms of the transportation in particular?
Well, the first metro, we missed it. There was no UA fire code, but obviously they were basing it on NFPA those days. Yeah, some things are very particular about this region, you know, operationally as well as fire systems wise. And later on, we did incorporate a section on transportation, the metros and the stations. I don't see much difference, and in fact, it's getting more complicated. The stations are looking like malls these days. So we are okay with that. The only challenge I see is I mean, the new proposals, which are more complex, and tunnels, we have had, you know, different views of how to deal with it. And the new metro is still more complex, as you know. We have kilometers of tunnels under existing building. Yeah, and the code is... That's how complex it is.
Okay. Are we still online?
No, it wasn't a fire alarm. So, put a feedback somewhere. I don't know where. I'm not quite sure.
No worries.
But
No worries.
anyway,
Is there?
we have time.
You can hear me?
Yeah, I think so. We're okay.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, code is, you know, progressive as always, and hearing all the stories the whole day, it's going to be, it's going to get tougher, you know, as we go. It's structures and designs are getting so complex, and code is trying to catch up actually. So, yeah, building-wise we are okay, but I would stress that, you know, rolling stocks as well need to catch up with it. I don't know what's happening internationally, but we did touch upon this, that rolling stock itself needs to comply with, you know, some kind of fire safety standards. That we are missing, and we are trying to stress it, and obviously the new revision will address all these things and might add a few things to the code. Yeah.
Understood, understood. And I think what you said as well in terms of the transportation projects, one of the key things in terms of the complexity of them is obviously that it's a key asset for this region, it's a key asset for neighborhoods as well. And obviously when we, as a designer, are building them, one of the key things is the interconnection of assets, rail with mall, rail with residential, etc. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit more, James?
Yeah, so I would say that I see that increasing more in the future as different stakeholders and the city grows and all the buildings and everything gets closer together. And whereas before we might have been able to say, okay, this is our boundary, you go there, we go there, and we just coordinate and interface. it's starting to become a little bit more complicated than that. We've got the horizontal, we've got the vertical, then we'll have the sort of the land issues, and then we'll have operational, who looks after maintenance as well, and then you start to throw into the mix the commercial aspects and revenue. So I would say stakeholders generally try to think about all of these things as early as possible, and as I said earlier, particularly how to respond operationally. So this not only normal day-to-day running of these mixed or connected assets, but of course in terms of things like emergency operational response. Where do people go? What do they do? Who's in charge? That sort of thing. So all of these things need to be looked at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess that ties into the question to Terry as well. I can see you nodding away.
Did I twitch? I twitched. I think I absolutely. You've identified the issue perfectly, because as the stakeholders' facilities get larger, then you get a different department that's in control of certain elements, which overlaps the fire and life safety, of course. And I'm going to state this, maybe I'll regret it, but who better knows about fire and life safety than the operational, fire and life safety people? So you need a lot of information flow coming back, or feedback from learning from incidents, and then that needs to reflect on who's going to look after the asset and be fire safety aware. There are cases at the moment where there are large gaps. Initially on design and plan, everything looks perfectly normal, and on the ideal world it works. And then what you do, then you fill it with people, and you put different departments into the equation, and you get a completely conflicting result. So not an easy fix, but again, I go back to what I said earlier. I think sharing a lot more together would probably resolve that. I go as far as to say we've always had the engineering over there. Well, they're kind of engineers. We don't even speak their language. Then you've got and ashamedly, that's been the fact for a number of years. Obviously, it's getting better, and I think it needs to go further forward. And today's historical signing of the MOU with IFE, I think, will help operationally as well in this region, because we will get shared platforms.
Absolutely. And Steve, in terms of your experience, obviously is based in UK, would you like to share some kind of insight in terms of how the market there is going in terms of the HS2, etc., and also the kind of interconnection of assets as well, and the complications thereof?
Yeah, I think one of the key factors in the interconnection of different assets is who manages the interface. Where does the responsibility lie when there's the crossover between, or the interface between two assets? And a lot of these infrastructures have their own internal engineering teams that maintain systems, but there's always a disconnect between when systems are interfaced and when one engineer is responsible for one system, but that has a cause and effect with another system, which they're not necessarily competent to test that system. So there needs to be a joined up approach, and from the design stage, really.
Absolutely. I'm just aware we've got 1 more minute left, so I'd like to put it to the floor. If anybody has any questions, would you like to raise your hand? I can see one. Has anybody got a microphone? We can.
Hi, James. This is for the James. Land use plan point of view, when you are working with the different stakeholders. So what is the requirements for the...
question to you, James,
yeah.
I think. It was in terms of land use stakeholders.
Yep.
And the different requirements for each of them.
So the stakeholders generally do, if developer stakeholders will not always have the same requirements. And they're often at different stages of their own development. And I would say now in this country, the developers are definitely becoming much more mature, what they're looking for. They probably have more focus on operational and maintenance requirements now. They're much more focused on what happens if we have no water supply, what happens if this, that, and the other. So we're looking at those sorts of things, I think, much more prevalent these days, I would say.
Any other questions? Yep, one more. Mr. Hamad.
Hi, everyone. This is Hamad from Ramble. I have a question with regards to the main challenges that you basically face when you're designing any transportation infrastructure. For example, the metro as well as the airports. And the same question to Terry Johnson as well, like what challenges you face when it comes to, if there's an event of fire within any of the buildings, so how do you access and what challenges you face as well?
I mean, go on, yeah.
Was that all for me?
So I think the first part was in regards to...
The first part was design.
Okay,
yeah.
well there's two major things really for design. One is changing requirements and the other one is getting it approved. Those are the two main things to focus on and the ones that we spend most of the time trying to resolve actually. So. Yeah. Very quickly from a design point of view.
Yes, thanks very much. That in rugby terms is a bad pass. So yeah, with regards to operations, we very much depend upon understanding the demographic of the building and of the population. We have to assess that and assess the risks that are involved with that, and only then can you come with a suggested risk reduction program whereby, be it, and I think I heard you correctly, whether it's partial evacuation or a full evacuation or whatever the decision may be with that, that's obviously under investigation now with a lot of the fires that have happened, and we've had some sad resulting deaths. So, it's evolving all the time from an operational perspective. So it should, by the way, so it should. Did that answer your question? I don't know.
I believe so in a way that basically they want you to know basically what are the challenges like in terms of firefighters when they access any building. So should the phased evacuation would be an appropriate evacuation, or should we consider like a full evacuation depending on the size of the building or compartmentation wise? Like,
okay.
What is your preference as a, when you access any building?
My preference is full evacuation for a lot of reasons, but it's all about messages. And of course, we have a completely different focus of buildings here. In Old Dubai, for example, there are a lot of, dare I say, single staircase buildings, some. And obviously that presents a problem for operational crews when they're trying to advance or get up to elevated floors and you've got people still evacuating. But one of the key things for me, and I'm very passionate about it, is let's not complicate the message to the fire life safety message to the occupants. Let's stick to one theme, and that is, if there's a fire, and ideally you'll be notified because there should be a fire alarm or whatever, then leave the building, get out of the building, leave that then to the fire or civil defence to solve it. Don't try and, we're going to have refuge areas. I know Burj Khalifa, please don't give me that because that's a completely different, that's off the scale, isn't it? I mean, there are refuge areas there. And you need refuge areas, I understand, for people that need assistance. But generally speaking, we should have one theme, one message, and that will be to get out as early as possible. It's proven time and time again, if anyone tries to stay put or stay in place, the result is disaster, really. And so I don't like the idea of chutes and all sorts of staircases that can appear and I'll go to the roof. forget it. It's one message. We've heard here, we've got how many different cultures and 200 different languages. It needs to be one message, one continual message. And we've been doing that for a number of years now, with the UAE code. And we really need to stick to that. Let's not try and change things too much, because it will result in complication and confusion, and sadly, I feel fire deaths.
But then, Terry, the single approach to evacuation or the fire strategies, it's questionable actually with these kind of complex buildings. And I guess eventually, what matters is the nature of the building, and the strategy has to be individual, accepted, and documented and understood by everybody. And for example, not to use elevator is a history now. With these kind of 160, 200 meter buildings, we have to rely on elevators. It is sitting there, and as long as, of course, when operation says that it's fine to use elevators, we have to use them. So strategy is not a thumb rule. It depends on building, occupancies, the nature, who is living there, the systems. It depends on different issues. And the call is made by firefighters finally. Yeah. That should be the strategy.
Yeah, 100%. And what you've said is exactly right. In terms of transportation hubs, these are very complex buildings. They can be very large buildings. And it may not be possible to simultaneously evacuate everybody at the same time. So yeah, it needs to be kind of bespoke. But fundamentally, life safety is key, as well as key of the safety of the attending fire crew as well. So I think we've probably reached and gone over the end of time. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of my panelists, and thank you guys for listening as well. Thank you so much.